Hello, welcome to the Study Skills blog. I'm Lauren, the Study Skills Advisor here at Jungarendi, and today we are talking about note-taking. Note-taking is a super important skill, and it's one that I really wished that I had understood more about when I was in undergrad, because through my first, second, and actually it wasn't until I actually did my PhD that I kind of figured out how to take notes properly. And I think the reason for that was nobody ever really explained to me why taking good notes was important or gave me some effective strategies for taking notes. So I used to take notes about everything as much as I could because I was terrified that I would miss out on something important. But the truth is that this wasn't particularly effective, and in actual fact, I just kind of wasted a lot of time and energy. I also didn't organize my notes very well, and so it became really difficult to find important information later on. So listen up, take my years of experience as your guide, and let's chat about how we can take effective notes and why it's important. Okay, so you might think of notes as simply being a way of copying information for later use, and this is a really important function of notes, but really it's far more complicated than that. Note-taking allows us to output information that is being input, and basically this is the difference between passively receiving information and actively engaging with information. This output process is really important in terms of how much of that information we retain, its complexity, and how it becomes fixed in our understanding. This is because in many ways, effective notes function as a form of external memory. This is called the external memory storage effect. Basically, it's our brain on a piece of paper. They allow you to return to information later on in order to study for an exam, to write an assignment, or for general usage. However, while functioning as an external storage system, notes also aid in the memorization process. And this means that they become part of your internal storage, which is, of course, your brain, your memory, your understanding. So simply put, when you take notes, you remember much more of what you have learned. Taking notes contributes to how we carry out a range of intellectual processes, such as problem solving and decision making. And this is called the encoding effect. Basically, notes allow information to be coded, which relieves some of the pressure that we put on our memory, which in turn makes complex thinking easier. When we take notes, we engage actively with the content of a lecture or class, which increases our comprehension. By having our notes function as this kind of external memory or your brain on a page, we allow more cognitive thinking space for actual problem solving. And there are a few reasons for this. Note-taking is cognitively demanding. It puts a lot of pressure on our brains to be able to listen to information, understand what is being said, and make connections between that information and our prior knowledge and experiences. So when we take notes, we're able to extract the most important key points, save those for later on. This relieves that memory pressure on our brain and allows more space for those connections to be made. At the same time though, that very process where that information has gone in your ear, it's being processed so that you can extract the key information, key terms, and make those connections, and then it's coming out again through your hand. That process inherently increases your comprehension. It actually creates new pathways in your brain. So basically, taking notes is a really effective learning tool. It's not just for later study, but for understanding and making connections at the moment that you're learning. Plus, if you're prone to falling asleep in lectures, taking notes will help keep you engaged. So knowing why we take notes is all very well and good, but it's also important to think about effective ways to take notes. So now we're going to chat about how we do it. So the next big question that people have is whether you should take notes with these guys or with this guy, longhand or typing. Research is actually split on this one. Some studies say that typing is more effective because it's faster, and being faster, it allows us to take more detailed notes quickly and return our attention to the instructor. However, some studies say that longhand is better because it's slower. Being slower, it means that we're forced to paraphrase more. We're forced to really think about what is important in what the instructor is saying. Basically, when we're typing, we're more tempted to copy verbatim what the instructor is saying, so word for word. Whereas when we're writing by hand, we're forced to condense that information to its most essential parts simply because we can't keep up with everything the instructor is saying. Being forced to distill that information is a really important part of that cognitive process that I was talking about earlier. And so studies do show that we retain information more when we write by hand. And this is because it leads to deeper processing, and this is really important. When we're writing by hand, we're forced to concentrate on the meaning of what the instructor is saying rather than the structure of the language. Studies say that this is the more effective method for retention and for deeper understanding. The truth is though, it's best to use whatever works for you, but just make sure you figure out a system and are organized about it. If you are going to use a laptop, close your tabs. Seriously, there's nothing worse than being distracted in the middle of your lecture by some notification pinging in the corner of your eye. You should also create folders or different Word documents for different topics and make sure you label every document and date it. So if you are using notebooks, have a separate notebook for each topic, or get one of these ones which divides the notebook up into different sections. Save the first page in your notebook for a contents page for yourself. Label every lecture or reading with the title and the date, write page numbers at the bottom, and create an index for yourself. You may also want to consider using some color coordination. I really love color coordination and I really love stationery, so this is one that I use all the time. So this means you may want to use a different colored pen for different types of information. So for example, to differentiate from core information from sub-ideas or definitions from examples. You may also want to go back and highlight certain keywords and phrases to draw attention to them. You may choose to use post-it notes to draw your attention to certain sections in your notes. Whatever you do, remember that these notes are for future you, so make it as easy for yourself as possible. What can be really difficult though is figuring out what information you should be recording. This is where organization and preparation are really important. Before you come to your lecture, have a look in your topic guidebook or on Flow and see what the week's big ideas are. Are there any key words? Have a look at the assessment that's coming up. That might give you an idea of what to look out for. Next, remember that the slides that are used during lectures are a tool that can help you. Now, you don't need to worry about transcribing everything that's on the slides because the slides will be distributed to you later. Instead, use these as a guide for what's important. You can use the headings of slides for headings in your own notes to help you keep them organized, and you can look for what are the key words and phrases that are used here. Also pay attention to the lecturer's body language and their tone. They have a tendency to slow down and repeat information if it's really important, and if you're really lucky, they may actually tell you this is an important piece of information, so pay attention to it. If they're rushing through something or throwing in an aside or an anecdote, you can probably be rest assured that that's not going to pop up in your exam. Now, don't panic, you will get better at recognizing these cues in your lecturers, and every lecturer's style is different. So after your first few classes, hopefully you'll be a little bit more familiar with what to listen out for and what to watch for in your lecturers. So now we're going to chat about a few different actual methods that you can use, the outline method and the Cornell method. The outline method is basically a hierarchical method of note-taking, and this means it's really easy to keep information organized because it's logical. Record main ideas in a bullet list. It uses headings, top-level bullets, and then details. You can use formatting tricks to help things stand out, such as bolding or underlining information. And this is also a really effective method to use when you are planning assignments. One of the problems with this method though is that it is very linear, which means that there's not a lot of space for moving information around, and it means that you're not utilizing the kind of visual tools that you can in other note-taking methods that do increase that comprehension. The outline method is what I used through most of my undergrad. My problem was that I didn't do it in a very organized way. So if you're going to use the outline method, which as I said, I think is really, really, really effective for things like planning for assignments. If you are going to use this method, do make sure that you are organized about it. Include things like the headings, subheadings, use bold and italics to differentiate information, and keep track of everything. The Cornell method is a really organized system that I'm a recent convert to, and now that I've started using it, I find it really, really effective. The Cornell method divides the page into 3 sections. The large box on the right-hand side is for notes. This is where you write the body of your notes, so paraphrasing what's really important throughout the lecture or from your readings. You may even want to draw here as well. You can add diagrams or make mind maps, draw connecting dots between ideas. The left-hand panel, this is for key ideas and for any questions that may come up as you go. So while you're writing in the body, write on the left-hand side, what's the key word that will draw your attention to that section later. You can also write questions to yourself here. So if there's something that you don't understand or any comments that you have for connections you want to make later on, note them to yourself here. The last section is the summary section at the bottom of the page. Now, this should be used to return to your notes after the lecture is finished. So when you go through your whole page, try to distill that information into a very short paragraph. This will ensure that you've summarized the main content of the lecture. It will help with that processing of the information, retaining that information, and of course, it's going to be super, super useful for you later in the semester when you come back to revise your notes. If you have trouble with this summary section, think about it as though you're explaining what happened in the lecture to a friend. If you were having a conversation with somebody, what would you tell them about what happened? What was the main takeaway message, do you think, from that lecture? You also might want to consider some other different kinds of spatial types of notes. So these are things like mind maps. After the lecture, maybe in that summary section or maybe on a new page, create some mind maps that connect the ideas to each other. Mind maps can be useful during the lecture if you're studying something a little bit more visual, like say biology or maths. You can make use of mind mapping as your note-taking tool as well. But what mind maps do that's really effective is they allow us to visualize information. And so that is again contributing to the way that we process and retain the information. So those are my 2 key recommendations for how you should take notes, the outline method or the Cornell method. Remember to make use of things like mind maps, color coding, use abbreviations for yourself if you have a tendency to write very long words. Whatever system you create, remember, be consistent, be organized, name and date your pages, keep your topics separate from each other, and remember that these notes are for your future self, and the better you take them now, the easier you're going to have a time of it in your revision, and the better job you do of paraphrasing while you're taking your notes now, the deeper understanding you are going to have of that lecture content. That's all from me for today. We'll be back next time talking about reading strategies. So hopefully this has been useful. If you want to share with me what some of your note-taking tools or strategies have been in the past, if you experiment with any of these new strategies, let us know in the comments. What do you think works? What doesn't work for you? Let us know.